One big difference too with public broadcasting and its funding is that the focus is on things like the science, things like what you learn.
This extraordinary new legal theory, pocket rescission, and there's no such thing, they're making it up. Communities that are going to be most affected by curtailing public broadcasting are the rural communities that voted for this administration.
Anyone who's been around the channel long enough knows that anytime I get a chance to do a Bill Nye segment, I'm gonna do a Bill Nye segment. This time he's on CNN discussing the PBS Corporation shutting down and why this matters for you and every American, right? If you can, take a moment first, leave us a like on the video, helps us out a ton, gets us out there in the algorithm, and let's get right to the Bill Nye.
Can you just talk a little bit about what the corporation meant for the work that you did and for the kids that you served?
Well, it's why the show became so popular. So for you broadcast historians, the Science Guy show started out in syndication at 22 minutes, 30 seconds, and then it ended up on public broadcasting with an extra 5 minutes of programming every day. So if you have a copy of those old shows, hang on to them. But with that in mind, that's where the show, the Science Guy show, became very, very popular. And it has served... The show has served to educate people in elementary science for decades, and I'm honored, and it's wonderful. It's great, but part of the reason it was so successful, or is so successful, is we had very compelling research that 10 years old was as old as you could be to get the so-called lifelong passion for science.
And this is true for a multitude of skills, a multitude of shows that taught a multitude of families all across the world things important to their life, from science to social skills to critical thinking to math and more. And also local broadcasting and reporting going out the window. Like many of those shows on these kinds of networks are were the only ways in which people could stay informed on the specifics in their town, whether it be weather patterns or the news, this and that. Shows that also teach fundamental skills to child development, like Daniel Tiger, like Sesame Street. All of these face uncertainty in the future and certainly diminished access for those who might not be able to afford, say, the internet or streaming platform memberships, where these might be placed instead. It's putting a paywall between kids and childhood development skills, between intellectualism, between academia, which is a mundane move, but a dangerous one, and one that definitely stands to affect the flow of information and truth in massive ways, especially for lower income households. That can't be understated.
What's going on, everybody, is a little bit in the weeds. The administration is trying to use these rules or laws, which were clearly, in my opinion, clearly never intended to be used this way, to derail the will of Congress. And so they're using these, apparently they're planning to use this business of impoundment of funds and this extraordinary new legal theory, pocket rescission. And there's no such thing, they're making it up. And the irony is that the communities that are going to be most affected by curtailing public broadcasting are the rural communities that voted for this administration. And as one example, I have met countless people, that is to say more people than I can count, who came to this country from other parts of the world and tell me that they learned to speak English by watching public broadcasting.
Which makes it even more ironic that the migrants need to assimilate and learn English crowd, Trump constantly on the campaign trail saying they're in schools and can't speak English. It's the same crowd now pushing to defund ways in which these very people learned English. It's almost like they just never wanted them to assimilate in the first place. Kind of gives the game away. But it's even more than just that. Bill Nye was my first introduction to the scientific method. That's why I like him so much. Empirical evidence and critical thinking, things that have advanced my life more than almost any other skill that I've learned throughout my childhood, where before I had blindly believed things that were wildly untrue, like creationism, for an example. And I couldn't imagine where my life would be without those skills that Bill Nye taught me at a young age, just because of a channel that I happened to find myself on because it was free and available when cable was out. And this is true for so many families everywhere, whether it be Bill Nye, Mr. Rogers, 321 Connect, Sesame Street, Daniel Tiger, right? Or any other of the pivotal shows for critical thought, abstract thinking, and childhood development and nurturement that are now being defunded, again, in favor of rich guy tax cuts. Another example of the party of pro-life not caring about your kids once they're born. It's almost like that's all about controlling women and not about the kids.
One big difference too with public broadcasting and its funding is that the focus is on things like the science, things like what you learn from Sesame Street, and not on, advertisements. I think I was only allowed to watch PBS growing up as a child. I think in no small part because my mom cared a lot about that. She didn't want me to have to think about the latest toy that I wanted to buy, but just to be there and learn things. What does that mean for kids?
Well, so part of the reason the Science Guy show was funded was through this thing called the Children's Television Act, because in the 1980s, back in the 20th century, children's television was becoming an ads for toys, which is, if you're a kid, that's fun. You watch a superhero animated show, and then you can buy a physical object, a doll, a action figure of that superhero. That's fun and cool, but it doesn't have the educational value that people in the early 1990s wanted children's programming to have.
It all stems from the conspiracy brain rot that exists in MAGA, which is another reason I do believe dismantling conspiracies of all kinds and all facets of America and life is an important goal, because even if someone believes a harmless conspiracy, it's the pipeline that leads them to more harmful ones that plant seeds in your mind that is a problem. It is the ability for you to act outside of empiricism and critical thought and to just blindly believe something unfalsifiable that creates bigger problems later in your life. MAGA also connects these things and weaponizes this with things like Planned Parenthood, saying, well, you can't trust them because the funding they receive, even while illegal to use on abortions, and that they definitely don't use it on there because they do all kinds of procedures for women's health, is solely being used for abortion. We don't have any evidence, but trust me, bro, it makes sense, right? Even though it doesn't make sense. If you actually used your critical thinking, nothing would point you to that conclusion. But instead, these people just say, don't use critical thinking, and that's what critical thinking is. Abortion is a procedure they barely do. It's less than 3% of their annual services. They've also done it with the Department of Education and saying, well, their money is going to illegal immigration advocacy groups. Okay, what's your evidence? No, trust me, bro. That's critical thinking. You don't need evidence. Evidence can be faked. Like, none of this is critical thinking. They do this with the NIH and DEI programs. So it's just attack a public, and it pains me because it's MAGA who likes to pretend that they're so smart and intellectual and that they're the critical thinkings that can't pick up on pattern detection, which is like something that is one of the strongest indicators of intellect. That, along with the ability to engage with hypotheticals, something that MAGA also is very strong at, that it's just the same thing every time, right? It's take a public good that does a great service that they want to privatize instead, tie it to politics in some left-wing manner, and then sell it to their base as if that's the reason they want to defund it, and that trumps and overdoes all the good that the service does. Again, you should be able to realize when the exact same manipulation, the exact same lie is being used for multiple situations, that it probably takes away from the veracity of that statement, right? These are things that critical thinking, like you could learn, and things like Bill Nye on PBS becomes important. And it's exactly why we see the Trump administration defunding things exactly like this, that they knew would end up to them closing. And it's exactly why the MAGA base eats this stuff up every time with no question.